Welcome back to Globewise TV tonight. We're diving into a raw, unfiltered corner of cinema history that shocked audiences and pushed boundaries like never before. In this video, we explore 10 most brutal 70s exploitation films that got banned, movies so controversial, so intense, that many were censored, cut, or completely pulled from theaters. These films weren't just entertainment, they challenged social norms, terrified authorities, and left a permanent mark on cult cinema. If you're fascinated by forbidden films, banned movies, and underground classics, you're in the right place. If you haven't subscribed to Globewise TV yet, hit that subscribe button now and turn on notifications so you never miss our deep dives into forgotten, controversial, and legendary films. And now tell us, which movie surprised you the most? Drop your favorite, or most shocking, pick in the comment box below. Let's get started. 1. I Spit on Your Grave, 1978. The 1970s gave us some of the most shocking, controversial, and downright brutal films ever made. These are the exploitation movies that pushed boundaries and got banned worldwide. Let's dive in. I Spit on Your Grave, 1978. The film that has haunted audiences for decades, I Spit on Your Grave is infamous for its raw, unflinching depiction of revenge and violence. Directed by Meyer Zarki, this film tells the story of Jennifer Hills, a writer who retreats to a secluded cabin to work on her book, only to be brutally attacked by a group of local men. The movie doesn't shy away from the horror of what she endures, and its graphic content sparked outrage the world over. The controversy wasn't just about the shocking scenes, it was about the moral debate. Was this a story of empowerment, or was it gratuitous exploitation? Governments around the world didn't wait for an answer. In the UK, it was banned outright. In Australia, it faced heavy censorship. Even in the US, certain states refused to screen it. Yet, despite, or perhaps because of, the controversy, I Spit on Your Grave became a cult phenomenon. It challenged the limits of cinema at the time, forcing audiences to confront the darker side of human nature. And over 40 years later, its brutal legacy still sparks debate among film fans, critics, and censorship boards. Why it matters for today's audience. Modern viewers see it as a study in revenge and survival, and its infamy has only increased its notoriety. It's a prime example of 70s exploitation cinema's ability to shock, provoke, and leave a mark on pop culture forever. If you think you could handle the shocking intensity of this cult classic, smash that like button. And tell us in the comments, would you watch I Spit on Your Grave knowing its controversial history? 2. Super Vixens, 1975. Roger Corman's shockwave classic. If you think the 1970s was all bell-bottoms and disco, think again. Super Vixens hit theaters in 1975 like a cinematic sledgehammer. Directed by Roger Corman, the king of B-movies, this film wasn't just controversial, it was outright banned in several countries for its extreme mix of sex, violence, and over-the-top exploitation. The story follows Super Eddie, a man whose life spirals out of control after a wild encounter with a series of dangerously seductive women, the titular Super Vixens. But this wasn't just a simple story. Corman pushed the envelope with shocking visuals, outrageous gore, and an unapologetic sexualized style that made mainstream audiences squirm. Think blood, lust, revenge, and an unfiltered assault on decency standards of the time. Corman's signature flair for hyper-stylized chaos turned Super Vixens into an instant cult classic, but the same excesses led to censorship nightmares. Some countries refused to screen it entirely, while others heavily cut its scenes to avoid scandal. Today, it stands as a brutal reminder of the 70s exploitation era, where nothing was too extreme and boundaries were meant to be obliterated. Fun fact: the film was marketed with outrageous comic book-style posters, exaggerating the sex and violence to the max, a marketing move that actually boosted its cult status over the years. If you thought modern horror and thrillers were intense, Super Vixens proves the 70s were already pushing audiences to the edge, decades before social media shock content. 3. Blackula, 1972. The vampire exploitation shockwave. In 1972, Hollywood unleashed a vampire like no one had ever seen before, and the world wasn't ready for him. Blackula tells the story of a centuries-old African prince resurrected as a bloodthirsty vampire, but this wasn't your classic Dracula tale. It was bold, brutal, and unapologetically raw. Unlike traditional horror films, Blackula combined gothic horror with the gritty urban realities of 1970s America, creating a unique blend of horror, blaxploitation, and cult cinema. Its dark, violent themes and intense sexual undertones made it a target for censors, and in several regions, theaters refused to screen it altogether. Audiences were captivated by William Marshall's iconic performance as the elegant yet terrifying vampire, a figure who commanded the screen with both charm and menace. Blackula didn't just shock viewers, it inspired a wave of blaxploitation horror films, paving the way for cult classics like Sugar Hill and Dracula's Black Daughter. Despite, or perhaps because of, its bans, Blackula became a cult phenomenon. Its mix of style, horror, and social commentary turned it into a film that dared to defy conventions, making it one of the most brutal and unforgettable exploitation films of the 70s. Blackula may have been banned in some cities, but today, it's streaming legally for fans of bold, gritty cinema. If you love horror with an edge and want more banned exploitation gems, stay tuned, this list only gets more shocking. 4. Hollywood Boulevard, 1976. When sex, blood, and satire collided. The 1970s were a wild era in Hollywood, a time when filmmakers pushed boundaries, and nothing was sacred, not even the movies themselves. Among the most infamous of these controversial films was Hollywood Boulevard, a shocking black comedy that became notorious for its daring content and the censorship it faced. Directed by Joe Dante and Alan Arkush, who would later go on to more mainstream fame, Hollywood Boulevard is a satirical look at the sleazy side of the film industry. The plot follows an ambitious young actress who dreams of making it big in Hollywood. But instead of glamour and fame, she finds herself trapped in a world of cheap horror movies, exploitation gimmicks, and ruthless producers willing to do anything for a buck. What made this film explosive for its time wasn't just the risque nudity or the on-screen debauchery, it was the unflinching satire of Hollywood itself. The filmmakers pulled no punches, depicting a behind-the-scenes world filled with exploitation, cruelty, and absurdity that left mainstream audiences uncomfortable. Certain scenes were considered so sexually explicit and violent that theaters in several states outright banned the movie, and it was denied distribution in some countries entirely. Yet, despite, or maybe because of, its notoriety, Hollywood Boulevard became a cult classic. Horror fans, cinephiles, and lovers of the bizarre flocked to see the movie, fascinated by its audacity and unapologetic critique of the industry. The film's mix of comedy, horror, and scandalous content made it a template for later exploitation films, proving that Hollywood itself could be both a star and a villain. In short, Hollywood Boulevard wasn't just banned, it became legendary for challenging the limits of what could be shown on screen, inspiring a generation of filmmakers to push boundaries even further. Fun fact: the film featured cameos from future horror icons, blending real Hollywood satire with shocking exploitation tropes. This gave it a meta edge that critics both loved and hated, but audiences couldn't get enough of. 5. Thriller, A Cruel Picture, 1973. If you think the 70s were tame, think again. Sweden's Thriller, A Cruel Picture, also known as They Call Her One Eye, is one of the most shocking exploitation films ever made. The movie follows the harrowing journey of a young woman, brutally abused and manipulated, who transforms into a ruthless vigilante bent on revenge. What made this film infamous wasn't just its graphic violence, it was the unapologetic way it portrayed the horrors of sexual exploitation, kidnapping, and raw revenge. Scenes that shocked audiences in the 70s were so extreme that many countries outright banned the film, labeling it too obscene for public viewing. Despite, or perhaps because of, its notoriety, Thriller. A Cruel Picture became a cult classic. Its influence is undeniable, inspiring modern revenge thrillers and even Quentin Tarantino, who once cited the film as a major influence on his Kill Bill saga. For viewers today, it's a brutal but fascinating look at how far 70s filmmakers pushed boundaries, combining real fear, shock, and revenge into a cinematic experience that still haunts and fascinates audiences decades later. Fun fact: the lead actress Christina Lindbergh performed many of her own stunts, making the film's intensity feel almost unbearably real. 6. The Arena, 1974, when exploitation went too far for its time. In the mid-1970s, exploitation cinema was pushing boundaries like never before, but The Arena, 1974, crossed a line that many countries weren't ready to accept. Set in ancient Rome, the film follows a group of female prisoners forced into gladiatorial combat, not for honor or survival, but for the entertainment of a brutal empire. What made The Arena so controversial wasn't just its violent premise, it was how openly it challenged traditional Hollywood norms. Unlike typical sword and sandals epics, The Arena stripped away heroism and replaced it with raw exploitation, blending intense action, shocking brutality, and themes of power, control, and survival. The film dared to portray women not as background figures, but as central fighters in a system designed to break them. For many censorship boards in the 1970s, this was unacceptable. Several countries banned or heavily censored The Arena upon release, citing excessive violence and morally provocative content. Even in regions where it wasn't officially banned, theaters often refused to screen it, and critics labeled it dangerous, offensive, or pure exploitation. Yet controversy only fueled its legacy. Over time, The Arena gained a cult following, especially among fans of underground cinema and grindhouse films. Viewers began to see it not just as shock entertainment, but as a reflection of the era's fascination with rebellion against social norms, and the extreme lengths filmmakers were willing to go to challenge censorship itself. Today, The Arena stands as a time capsule of 1970s exploitation cinema, a film that shocked audiences, terrified censors, and proved that controversy could be just as powerful as box office success. It may have been banned in its time, but it refused to be forgotten. 7. Pink Flamingos, 1972. The film so shocking it redefined banned. In the early 1970s, cinema was already pushing boundaries, but nothing prepared audiences for Pink Flamingos. Directed by underground filmmaker John Waters, this low-budget exploitation film didn't just challenge good taste, it declared war on it. At the center of the chaos was Divine, a fearless cult icon who played a character obsessed with being crowned the filthiest person alive. What followed was a relentless parade of deliberately outrageous scenes designed to shock, offend, and horrify mainstream audiences. But here's the twist. Pink Flamingos wasn't banned because it was poorly made. It was banned because it worked exactly as intended. The film openly mocked social norms, morality, and censorship itself. Many countries outright refused to screen it, theaters were pressured to shut down showings, and critics labeled it one of the most disgusting films ever made. Some audiences walked out in disbelief, others returned again and again, drawn by its dangerous reputation. Despite, or because of, the outrage, Pink Flamingos became a midnight movie phenomenon. It proved that exploitation cinema didn't need studio approval or mass appeal. All it needed was boldness, rebellion, and a refusal to apologize. Over time, what was once banned and condemned transformed into a cult classic, studied in film schools and praised for its influence on independent cinema, punk culture, and queer representation. Pink Flamingos didn't just break the rules of 1970s filmmaking, it burned the rulebook, laughed at the ashes, and dared the world to look away. And decades later, people still can't. 8. Caged Heat, 1974. The exploitation film that crossed every line. In the early 1970s, Hollywood's underground scene was exploding with films that dared to challenge authority, morality, and censorship itself. And right at the center of that storm was a film so provocative that many countries tried to erase it from existence. Its name was Caged Heat. On the surface, Caged Heat presents itself as a women in prison drama, a genre already notorious for pushing boundaries. But director Jonathan Demme, who would later go on to win Oscars and redefine mainstream cinema, used this low-budget exploitation framework to tell a much darker and more subversive story. The film follows a group of young women trapped inside a brutal correctional facility where power is abused, justice is ignored, and cruelty is routine. What made Caged Heat truly shocking wasn't just its raw atmosphere. It was how openly it exposed systemic corruption and institutional violence at a time when such themes were rarely acknowledged on screen. Censors across the globe were quick to react. The film faced bans, heavy cuts, and distribution shutdowns, especially in regions where prison abuse and authority corruption were considered taboo subjects. Many theaters refused to screen it altogether, labeling the movie dangerous, immoral, or simply too disturbing for public audiences. But controversy wasn't the end of Caged Heat, it was the beginning of its legend. What studios feared, underground audiences embraced. Drive-ins, midnight screenings, and bootleg copies helped the film survive censorship attempts. Over time, critics began re-evaluating the movie, recognizing that beneath its exploitation label was a bold social critique wrapped in rebellion. Ironically, the very elements that got Caged Heat banned are what cemented its place in film history. It became a stepping stone for Jonathan Demme's legendary career and a defining example of how 1970s exploitation cinema wasn't just about shock, it was about resistance. Today, Caged Heat stands as a reminder of an era when filmmakers fought censorship with creativity and courage. It may have been banned, but it was never silenced, and that's exactly why it still burns in the memory of cult cinema fans worldwide. 9. Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS, 1975. The exploitation film so extreme it was banned across the world. In the mid-1970s, exploitation cinema was pushing boundaries like never before, but few films went as far, or sparked as much outrage, as Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS. Released in 1975, this low-budget shock film disguised itself as a war drama, but what audiences actually got was something far more disturbing. Set in a fictional Nazi prison camp, the film follows Ilsa, a ruthless commandant obsessed with proving twisted theories about human endurance and control. What unfolds is a brutal exercise in cruelty that left audiences stunned and governments furious. Unlike traditional war films that focused on heroism or survival, Ilsa leaned fully into exploitation excess. It stripped away nuance, replacing it with relentless shock value. Critics condemned it immediately, accusing the film of trivializing historical horrors for profit. As backlash grew, the movie was swiftly banned or heavily censored in countries including the UK, Germany, and Australia. What truly made Ilsa infamous wasn't just its content, but its timing. The wounds of World War II were still painfully fresh for many viewers, especially in Europe. To turn such trauma into grindhouse entertainment crossed a line that even exploitation fans struggled to defend. Yet despite, or because of, the controversy, Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS became a cult phenomenon. Underground screenings, bootleg tapes, and late-night grindhouse showings kept the film alive long after its official bans. It spawned multiple sequels and cemented itself as one of the most notorious titles in exploitation history. Today, the film is often discussed not as entertainment, but as a cautionary example, a reminder of how far cinema can go when shock outweighs responsibility. Whether viewed as tasteless exploitation or a dark artifact of 1970s grindhouse culture, one thing is certain. Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS remains one of the most banned, debated, and disturbing films of its era. And that's exactly why it still haunts lists like this one. 10. Sugar Cookies, 1973. when sweet surfaces hid something sinister. On the surface, Sugar Cookies, 1973, looked like just another low-budget thriller riding the grindhouse wave of the early 70s. The title itself sounded harmless, almost playful. But audiences who dared to watch it quickly realized this film was anything but sweet. Set in a world of wealth, power, and obsession, Sugar Cookies tells the disturbing story of a mysterious writer who manipulates a troubled young woman into becoming his muse. What begins as a promise of fame and creative freedom slowly twists into something far darker. Behind locked doors and polite smiles, the film exposes a chilling portrait of control, exploitation, and psychological domination. Unlike many exploitation films of its era that relied purely on shock value, Sugar Cookies crossed a line by blurring fantasy and abuse in ways that felt uncomfortably real. The violence wasn't loud or exaggerated, it was quiet, calculated, and deeply unsettling. This realism made the film far more disturbing than its grindhouse peers. Censors and critics reacted swiftly. Several countries either banned the film outright or heavily cut key scenes, citing its disturbing themes and morally ambiguous storytelling. At a time when cinema was already pushing boundaries, Sugar Cookies was accused of going too far, romanticizing manipulation and psychological harm rather than condemning it outright. The controversy only fueled its underground reputation. Drive-in theaters advertised it as too shocking for mainstream audiences, while word of mouth turned it into a forbidden curiosity. Ironically, the very reasons it was suppressed are what keep it talked about today. Looking back, Sugar Cookies feels like a dark mirror held up to Hollywood itself, revealing how power can corrupt creativity and how exploitation can hide behind sophistication. It's not an easy film to watch, and it was never meant to be. That discomfort is exactly why it was banned, and why it still haunts cult film discussions decades later. And that wraps up our deep dive into 10 most brutal 70s exploitation films that got banned. These movies may have been controversial, censored, or even erased from theaters, but their impact on cult cinema still lives on today. The 1970s was a fearless era of filmmaking, where creators pushed limits, challenged rules, and left behind stories that still spark debate decades later. Whether you admire them or question them, one thing is clear: these films refuse to be ignored. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Globewise TV for more rare, forgotten, and underground movie explorations. Turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. Now it's your turn. Which film from this list shocked you the most or deserves more attention? Let us know in the comment box below. Until next time, keep exploring cinema beyond the mainstream.